Hi guys, today I'm going to get into a subject that could be misinterpreted by the YouTube powers that be. But I believe that it's important to help clarify what has happened to our world. So for the censors, I want to make it clear that this video is my speculation based on my review of the literature available. A lot of things about COVID-19 didn't fit right when it was happening and still doesn't make sense according to the official narrative. So we are going to look at the program which was unleashed on our government that played havoc on our population. I'd love for you to tell me your thoughts and experiences with COVID-19. If you took the vaccine, do you have any persistent adverse effects? I'm going to link some additional videos in the description that will further explain the technologies referred to in this video. First, let me ask you to help me out with the channel and share, like, and subscribe. Don't forget to also hit the bell so that you are notified of new video uploads, and if you'd like to leave a super thanks tip, it's under the 3 dots below the video. Okay, so let's get into this with the understanding that I will be treading lightly for censorship reasons. So feel free to ask questions or leave comments for better clarity. I mentioned that there were flags, and we are going to discuss some of those red flags and how you might be able to identify such tactics in the future. The first red flag was the blatant sensationalization about COVID-19. The hysteria should have been a red flag to all of us. Never in my life have I seen such mass hysteria. The H1N1 pandemic was the closest, but there were never any type of mandates. The mortality rate was slightly less than COVID-19, and the hospitalization rate was about the same with very similar symptoms. The H1N1 virus appears to have been the precursor virus to COVID-19. Maybe a dry run. The vaccine for H1N1 was also very quickly in September 2009, but in 2010, the H1N1 strain has been included in the annual flu vaccine. We are going to look at the 4 different vaccines all within the annual flu shot, so you know what you are getting if you take the annual flu shot. When you get a flu shot today, you are actually receiving 4 different vaccines, including Influenza A, H1N1, Influenza A, H3N2, Influenza B, Victoria lineage, and Influenza B, Yamagata lineage. So the annual flu shot contains 4 different variant vaccines, yet the COVID-19 never changed for the variants that were rapidly occurring. Yet another red flag. So let's look at the 3 components that created the COVID-19 pandemic. First, it was the rapid vaccine deployment. It takes no medical background to identify these red flags. I am talking about that feeling in your chest, saying this doesn't seem quite right. It's not a thought. It was a feeling that I would venture many of us had, even those who took the vaccine. So I urge you to listen to those feelings. The COVID-19 virus spread across the globe with unprecedented speed, going from the first reported cases in Wuhan, China in late 2019 to a full-blown global pandemic within months. By March 2020, nearly every country had reported infections, leading to mass shutdowns, economic collapse, and widespread fear. The response to the virus, including lockdowns, forced business closures and mandates, devastated small businesses, disrupted supply chains, and caused significant job losses. Mental health declined due to isolation, while children lost critical years of education. Meanwhile, rushed policies, government overreach, and conflicting health directives fueled public distrust. While COVID-19 itself posed some health risks, the societal and economic damage caused by the response proved to far outweigh the risk of the virus and created long-lasting changes in our daily lives which are still felt today. There isn't a day I go out in public where I don't see somewhere wearing a mask due to the persistent fear that the plandemic created in people. So this exaggerated hyperbole disseminated about COVID-19 was our first clue. Let's look at red flag number 2, the rapid production of a vaccine after identification of COVID-19. I want you to be able to identify such unorthodox and dangerous practices related to drug approval. There is nothing to feel silly about if you took the vaccine because even President Trump fell for the lie. Personally, I believe that he was strategically surrounded by deep state medical experts that were deliberately placed in those positions for a well-designed biological warfare operation. I believe that both Dr. Fauci and Dr. Deborah Birx were working against Trump, not for him. Now Trump knows better and has put his own team in place which he can trust. Trump's decisions based on the misinformation of these so-called experts was widely used as a leftist talking point to discredit President Trump. Trump is a businessman and a negotiator, and anyone that had a clear mind would know the foundation for his decisions were molded by the recommendations of these deep state experts. So based on everything Trump was being told, the rapid development of a vaccine seemed to be the logical response. He had not one person around him to explain the drug approval process to him. And to this day, the mainstream media continues to support this streamlined development of a vaccine. So I'm going to briefly tell you about the drug approval process designed to protect us. Typically, developing a new vaccine from identifying a novel antigen to full approval takes 10 to 15 years, not 1 year. The process involves several key stages, so let's look at the typical vaccine development timeline. First, we must identify the pathogen or virus and do preclinical studies, which generally takes 2 to 5 years to study the bug. First, scientists must identify the pathogen and study the antigens that are present on its surface. These antigens are unique molecules that trigger an immune response in the body. Once identified, researchers must analyze how these antigens interact with the immune system, including the body's ability to recognize and fight off the pathogen. Understanding the specific characteristics of the antigens allows scientists to design targeted vaccines or therapies that stimulate the immune system to produce antibodies, offering protection against future infections. This process is crucial for developing effective vaccines and ensuring that they are tailored to neutralize the pathogen effectively. This step had to be skipped specific to COVID-19. The next phase of the approval process for a vaccine includes lab and animal testing to assess immune response. These clinical animal studies generally take 6 to 8 years. This didn't happen. Then human trials begin. Phase 1 trials are small-scale human trials conducted for safety. This usually occurs for about 1 year, and if the drug has limited side effects, then it progresses to larger human studies. Phase 2. Medium-scale trials are then conducted to study human immune response, and this takes about 2 years. Absent of documentation, we can only assume that Phase 1 and Phase 2 trials were not conducted for the COVID-19 vaccine, and the world population became study subjects for what should have been Stage 3. Large-scale trials which are generally carefully monitored for about 3 to 5 years. But even if a drug proves to be safe and effective, the process of drug design, manufacture, and regulator approval must be done, which generally takes another 1 or 2 years to assure that the manufacturer can repeatedly produce a product based on the predicate studies. Large-scale production and distribution protocols and validation are then reviewed. The FDA is the central agency responsible for approving vaccines in the United States. It evaluates the above clinical trial data to ensure a vaccine's safety, efficacy, and quality before it is authorized for use in the U.S. The FDA also monitors the vaccine's performance after approval through ongoing surveillance, which continues after approval. For 1 to 2 years after approval, surveillance is supposed to be very rigorous to identify any rare or delayed side effects that may not have been observed during clinical trials. The Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS, a collaboration between the FDA and CDC, plays a significant role during this phase. So far, there have been over 1.5 million reports of adverse events related to COVID-19 vaccines in VAERS. It's important to realize that reports are not definitively due to the vaccine, But we must also realize that research suggests that the reporting rate is around 1% to 10% of all actual adverse events from a particular drug. This means that for every 100 adverse events, only about 1 to 10 are reported to VAERS. Considering the 1.5 million reports in VAERS, we can extrapolate the actual side effects to be somewhere between 15 to 150 million cases. After the first year or two after approval, post-production surveillance continues through programs like the Vaccine Safety Data Link, VSD, which collects data from healthcare systems across the U.S., and the Clinical Immunization Safety Assessment, CISA project, which helps assess new vaccine safety concerns. Long-term safety surveillance is then supposed to be conducted indefinitely to identify adverse events that may occur years after vaccination. Rather than transparency, we have received nothing but secrecy and illogical explanations about COVID-19. The official explanation for the rapid approval of the COVID-19 vaccine includes the assertion that there was prior research on coronaviruses such as SARS and MERS. This is faulty thought, however, because a vaccine developed for one variant of a virus does not mean that it will be equally effective against other variants, so additional separate studies should be required. The mainstream narrative also told us that mRNA technology was already in development, but this doesn't wash either, because mRNA is a delivery system, and a delivery system does not work universally for all vaccines. The effectiveness of a delivery system depends on several factors, including the vaccine's composition, target disease, and immune response required. Then we were told that we're overlapping trial phases instead of sequential, and they cited global emergency funding and cooperation, which should play no part in how quickly something goes through the approval process unless you're paying someone. So in summary, the approval process of COVID-19 was accelerated by about 10 years at the expense of safety and efficacy, and now the results are coming out. I say that the rapid production was a red flag because we aren't only talking about approval that had to be done. This was a novel virus, and we had to do the research on what it was and what would kill it. So the COVID-19 vaccine was released approximately 1 year after identification of COVID-19. As mentioned, typically, developing a new vaccine from identifying a novel antigen to full approval takes 10 to 15 years. So with my understanding and experience in drug regulation, I am confident saying that this kind of timeline is ridiculously inadequate to evaluate anything but possibly a generic drug which has already been proven effective and safe. In cases of generic drugs, an abbreviated drug application is used. To my knowledge, the COVID-19 virus was never even isolated. It's been reported that Pfizer has been unable to prove in courtrooms that they ever isolated COVID-19. What I'm going to say to you now is my opinion. I believe that there were 2 bioweapons that were used. As someone who has always been fascinated by drug design, I have to tell you that it was a brilliantly designed 3-part plan of biological warfare. When I use the language biological warfare, it appears that it was much more subtle than spraying something in the air. That would have been too obvious. This bioweapon was designed as the gift that keeps on giving. My guess is it was done that way for a more selective culling and to hide the fact of what was going on. You should understand that such experimentation on humans without their knowledge is nothing new. It happened in numerous government operations and programs over the years. I'll put some links in the description and at the end. So let's look at the various components of the COVID-19 caper. So part 1 of the operation was the virus or pharmaceutical kitchen sink, as I like to call it. I haven't done a video on it yet, but it's very clear that it was designed as part of gain-of-function experiments. Some have said that a Ukraine bioweapons lab and the Wuhan Institute and University were all involved. I don't know if any US facilities were involved, but it does make sense to keep it offshore. I haven't done a video on this yet, because I got a ban and strike on a video that I did about the origin of the virus and the why, so we'll keep this generic. Part 2 of the plan was the masks. Yes, the mandatory masks that you were told would protect us from the virus actually cause normal upper respiratory flora or bacteria to multiply. Since you have the mask on, you can't breathe the bacteria out and they multiply and move down to the lower respiratory tract, which can cause pneumonia. The bacterial proliferation was enhanced by the fact that CO2, which accumulates in the mask, and studies show that COVID lives longer in CO2 droplets, thereby increasing transmissibility. A video with the full explanation of how the masks and increased CO2 are harmful will be linked in the description and at the end. The third part of this plandemic was the vaccine itself, specifically the mRNA technology. I haven't looked into the others, but the mRNA technology literally causes an autoimmune disorder. Your own body creates a piece of the pathogen, so it's the gift that keeps giving. It's quite fascinating how they did it, but very diabolical. I will also link a video on the vaccines. So that's it for today, guys. I apologize, but I have been so backed up trying to keep up with everything. I know that many of you were never vaccination, and if you are like me, you never got COVID-19 either, or at least didn't know you had it. I really have a good immune system because in pharmacy, I was exposed to so many bugs and my body acquired an immunity. I've always been one of those kind of people that isn't afraid of germs. There is likely going to be a new scare, perhaps the bird flu, since a bunch of chickens were apparently killed over it. Yet another overreaction considering the pathogenicity of the bird flu. Look out for the red flags. I'll also link a video on the H5N1 or bird flu, in case you want to learn about what appears to be ramping up as the next big health scare. I'll leave you with a quote from Hippocrates. The greatest medicine of all is teaching people how not to need it. Until next time, stay safe and be smart.